Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this online policy dialogue organized by the European Policy Center entitled The Implications of the EU's Gas Package for Climate, the Internal Market and International Trade, which has been kindly supported by the UK mission to the EU. My name is Dekeyrel, the Climate and Energy Policy Analyst for the Sustainable Prosperity for Europe program of the European Policy Center, and I will be moderating the event for you today. I'm glad to see so many of you joining, with over 250 registrations for today's event. This policy dialogue will look at the so-called hydrogen and decarbonized gas market package and consider its potential implications for the energy transition, the internal market, trade with third countries, and EU security of supply, as well as the package's role in achieving climate neutrality and empowering European consumers. This gas package was proposed by the Commission in December of last year and envisages a revision of the third gas package of 2009 in order to ensure that the EU's regulatory framework for the internal gas market is fit for 55. More specifically, it seeks to establish a dedicated infrastructure and market for hydrogen within the EU, as well as facilitate the uptake of renewable and low carbon gases into the existing gas network. However, despite its name, it has other objectives as well, such as fostering more integrated network planning between electricity, gas, and hydrogen networks, promoting consumer engagement, and improving EU security of supply. Of course, at this point, there is no need to explain why these proposals are so relevant and important, as tensions between Ukraine and Russia continue to escalate and high gas prices are driving increasingly worrying levels of inflation across Europe. To discuss this topic, we have four speakers joining us today. Tania Marquez, Member of Cabinet of Energy Commissioner Kadri Simpson, Andreas Guth, Policy Director at Eurogas, a business association representing the European gas, wholesale, retail, and distribution sectors, Chris Logue, Head of Markets at UK National Grid Gas Transmission, the British Gas Transmission System Operator, and finally Esther Bollendorff, Senior Gas Policy Coordinator at Climate Action Network Europe, Europe's leading NGO coalition against climate change. We also have a pre-recorded message from Irish MEP Sean Kelly from the EPP. Thank you to all the speakers for taking the time to be with us here today. So we will first have introductory remarks from each of the panelists, after which we will open the floor for questions from the audience. I would encourage participants to already write down any questions you may have during the presentations of our speakers using the Q&A function of Zoom, and to please keep the questions short so it is easier for us to keep an overview. If you wish to do so, you may of course also intervene directly during the Q&A session by raising your hand in Zoom. Without much further ado, I will give the floor to a speaker from the Commission, Tania Marquez, who will give an overview of the Commission's proposals and will talk about their potential implications for EU climate neutrality and security of supply.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I hope I can be heard well and seen well. And normally there should be a presentation or some slides that appear on your screen. And although I would go a bit faster on some of them, it might help us to follow the presentation. So I think the conference we have today is very timely. Because as the moderator has said, there are many things going on at the moment in the gas sector. We have now these current tensions in the border with Ukraine, and I mean all of this is certainly affecting our gas markets and our gas prices. When we decided to prepare the package, we were not thinking particularly on all these events. The main aim of the package was really the decarbonization of the gas sector. We had adopted in 2018 already a very ambitious proposal of modification of the electricity legislation, where the main aim there was really to decarbonize the electricity sector and to ensure that there was a very important amount of renewable electricity that could enter into the market. So this year we wanted to move ahead and change the focus from electricity to gas and look at what we could do in the gas sector to decarbonize it. Because all our scenarios for 2050, they demonstrate the evidence that there will still be quite an important amount of gas. Gas, when I say gas, I mean gas carrier in our energy mix, of around 20% of the consumption in 2050. And therefore, we cannot just look into the electricity as a carrier. We also need to look into the gas if we are serious about decarbonizing the energy system by 2050. But as it was said by the moderator, as things move on in autumn, we also see that our package could have also quite a lot of relevance in the context of the high gas prices that we were seeing as we returned from holidays in summer, which I think was quite an unexpected increase in prices. And also as a way of addressing some of the security of supply concerns in the gas sector that we have seen latest in the winter and very much today and these days with the Ukrainian conflict. Maybe we pass to this next slide. Yeah, thank you very much. So as you can see, indeed, from the security of supply perspective, we find ourselves that despite the very important efforts that the EU has done to diversify its routes and its suppliers, and also to have more production of renewables and more savings of energy in our system, we still are very much dependent on fossil fuels. And also from those natural gas that we use today, 90% is imported, and notably 40% of it imported from a single producer. Therefore, we have suffered very much this winter the fact that some of the eastern pipelines, or pipelines of gas coming from the east, have very much decreased the amount of flows on them. Notably, if you look into the graphs, you will see how important the decrease have been in the Ukrainian gas transit system and in Yamal, which currently makes that only up to 44% of the available pipeline capacity is unused. If we go to the next slide, gas storage, you will see that we are also in a situation today where we are at historic low levels of tanks and underground storage filled, with around 31% of current storage capacity being filled currently, with big differences between the storage that we have owned by Gazprom in Europe, which is at levels of 16%, as compared to the 34% of field capacity that we have in the other gas storage, underground gas storage that we have. You can see really that this year we are really seeing something exceptional as compared to previous years. So this is why we thought, well, really moving into renewable gas that is produced in Europe, renewable hydrogen that is also produced in Europe mainly. This is a way that we become less dependent of fossil fuels and of our external imports. Next slides, please. Yeah, and maybe also the next one, because this only shows you the storage levels. If you look at the gas prices, just to show you that indeed we have seen after this very high global demand of gas, particularly triggered by Asia, that the prices of gas have really increased this winter, reaching its peak in December with 180 euros per megawatt hour. And while we have seen some relaxation in the last month, also with quite big quantities of LNG arriving to our coast in Europe, We see that the tensions in the Ukrainian border have basically brought a lot of volatility, and just yesterday I think the average prices were around 100 euros the megawatt hour. So it's we are really seeing a lot of tension and stress also in the prices. If we move into the electricity wholesale prices, obviously, since we have a marginalist system in Europe, we also see that any big increases in gas are obviously reflected also in the wholesale electricity prices, which have increased very much in the last year. Last week they were around 136 euros the megawatt hour, which is around 260% higher than the prices that we had last year in the same month. And of course, what is happening in the wholesale gas and electricity market is also being reflected in the retail market, and this is causing quite a lot of concern in member states and also, of course, in the European Commission regarding our affordability and our industrial competitiveness. So this is why the Commission adopted last October also a toolbox of measures that member states could take if they wanted to address in the short and medium term the high energy price spike. Now let me turn into the gas package as such. So as I said, the main aim was decarbonization, but we see now that this is really the right way ahead, because it can also help us to become less dependent from external suppliers, and also control better the price increases. There were basically, if you go to the next slide, please. Yep. So there were basically 5 main aims in our proposal. The first one and the most important one was to facilitate the access to renewable and low carbon gases into the gas grid, including by dealing with certification issues. I will spend just 1 minute on that in a moment. The second aim was to come up with the market rules to ensure that there could be a dedicated hydrogen market and hydrogen infrastructure in future. So what are the rules that should govern such an infrastructure? The third objective was to integrate network planning electricity, gas, and in future also hydrogen. On that I will not spend much time because I don't have it, but the idea is just that we are asking member states that when they developed, well, the TSOs in particular, when they developed their network plans, they do it on the basis of a joint scenario for electricity, gas, and hydrogen, so that we are in line with our energy integration strategy that we adopted in 2020. The fourth objective is to mirror very much the provisions that we have in the electricity directive concerning consumers also to the gas market. And finally, we also adopted rules. We modified the security of gas supply regulation to improve resilience and security of supply of gas. Next slide, please. So as regards the first block, how to facilitate the access of these new gases into the grid, the main proposals that we put on the proposals are the following. First, we propose to remove cross-border tariffs for renewable and low carbon gases. So remove them completely, so 100% discounts, including also at the borders with third countries and at the LNG terminals, which are obviously also our border with third countries on the coast. We also propose that there will be 75% discounts on tariffs for the injection of these new gases within the territory of the EU, and a 75% of discount for the tariffs at the entry-exit points in the gas storage facilities. This would, according to us, help at least a bit these new gases to compete with natural gas, as the transit fees they will have to pay will be much lower. We also introduced legislation to make sure that if member states want to blend hydrogen in the gas grid, there will not be problems of quality at the border, so that the TSO would not be able to stop gas flows from another member state if they don't include more than 5% of hydrogen in the blend. And we ensured that there was a certification system both for renewable gases and for low carbon gases. I see that you have not gone follow my screen, my slide. So in this slide, you can see what I just said. If you move to the next slide, I will just basically explain that regarding the second element, so the market rules for the future hydrogen market. Here, what we did is to basically decide which are the rules that will govern the infrastructure, the hydrogen dedicated infrastructure in the future. And without going in detail on that, I will just simply give you the basic idea, which is that at the very first moment, so up to 2030, what we see is that the different rules governing this infrastructure should be more flexible. We should allow that as regards things like third-party access, tariff setting, or ownership and bundling, there should be some flexibilities already, because this is a new market. We have the impression we should not over-regulate. And there are also already some infrastructures that are working, hydrogen dedicated infrastructures working, that do not typically fit in the rules that we are imposing for the period after 2030. So we wanted to give a little bit of phasing period for them to adapt. After 2030, we are very clear, so we are also giving certainty to the market, to the investors, how the rules will apply and what rules will be there. And there we really go for very ambitious internal energy market rules concerning third-party access, ownership and bundling, tariffs set by the regulator, and so on. Next slide, please. Just 1 minute to explain a bit what are the rules that we also included in the regulation on security of supply. They are relevant precisely because of what we have just discussed about the very complicated security of supply issue we are having at the moment. There are basically 3 measures that we have there. First, we have some provisions to ensure that the solidarity agreements that can be made by the member states in case of security of supply disruptions can be are basically easier to apply, and there are some kind of templates and clauses that could be used in those agreements, so that we make member states' life a little bit easier to come up with those agreements. Currently, we only have 2 of those agreements, and we expect in the future to be around 40. So we think these provisions would be important to facilitate that. Secondly, we reinforce the role of gas storage in the regional risk assessment plans that member states of the same region, they have to come up with. So they have to integrate what is the concept of storage, gas storage in their plans, and if necessary, they will need to modify the contingency plans to make sure that there is enough storage in the region. And thirdly, we also have a provision facilitating the possibility for member states, TSOs, to buy jointly, if they wish, the gas strategic reserves that are necessary, sometimes it's even compulsory in some countries, to face security of supply situation problems. That's all for me, and thank you very much for the extra 3 minutes I think I took. I'm really sorry for the delay.
Thank you, Tatiana, for giving us such a comprehensive overview of the new gas package and for giving us a better idea on its importance for both achieving climate neutrality and security of supply. Now we'll have a look at the pre-recorded message from Irish MEP Sean Kelly from the EPP, who will talk about the Fit for 55 package more generally, the role of natural gas and of renewable and low carbon gases in the EU's energy transition and how the gas package proposal will enable these gases to play their needed role in the clean energy transition.
Unfortunately, I cannot make it to today's very interesting event. However, I would like to thank the European Policy Centre for the invitation and for the opportunity to say a few words on the EU gas package and its impacts for climate, the internal market and trade, as well, of course, as the Fit for 55 package more broadly. The Fit for 55 package proposed by the European Commission is the largest single batch of legislation to tackle climate change proposed by any government, anywhere. It is designed to update EU laws to meet the new 2030 emissions reduction target of 55% below 1990 levels. The package builds on some pre-existing pillars of the EU's climate architecture and introduces new ones. The Innovation Fund and Modernisation Fund, already existing in the EU ETS, are retained and increased, while a new Social Climate Fund is introduced. This vast and detailed release of legislation is currently working its way through the Parliament, and I see a real sense of urgency amongst colleagues to push for more ambition with the practical steps needed to achieve it. In December of last year, the Commission announced a key regulation on the EU market for hydrogen, natural gas and renewable gases, as well as a directive on the same subject. The regulation will be led by my friend and colleague, former Polish Prime Minister Jerzy Buzek, in the same group as me, the EPP, who has vast knowledge in this area. Although I will take a keen interest in both these gas files, I have been appointed by the EPP as the group's rapporteur for the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, another key piece of legislation that I feel will be very consequential to the EU climate performance. How Europe handles the energy transition, in my view, will not just determine our economic future, but it will determine the very social cohesion of the entire Union. Ensuring a smooth transition will be incredibly important in this regard, and this will need dedicated funds to protect those most exposed from rising costs of fossil fuel prices. By their very nature, wind and solar are intermittent. We must plan to replace our fossil fuel-based backup system with battery storage and demand response, and utilize the energy storage of molecules such as hydrogen that is produced with renewable energy. However, we also should not hide from the fact that there still is a role to play for transitional fuels until then. The core goal is to decarbonize the economy and the energy system, and we do not have time for this process to be tainted by ideology. Energy has always played a big role in the complexion of the geopolitical landscape. The situation on the Ukrainian-Russian border reminds us of the importance of security of gas supplies, and more broadly, in my view, it shows that Russia cannot be a trusted partner for the EU, and this should include how we get our energy. President von der Leyen is right. It is in Europe's strategic interest to diversify our gas sources to reduce our dependence on Russia. Gas will play a significant role in our energy transition from coal, especially in regions where coal has traditionally been the main source of energy. In the medium term, natural gas will be a necessary vehicle to reduce carbon emissions, but we should ensure that its common classification as a transitional fuel rings true, and we make plans now for our longer term needs. Electricity alone cannot deliver all the energy we will need in the future, and renewable and other low carbon gases will increasingly replace fossil fuels. This means that we need to integrate more and more low and zero emission gases such as hydrogen, biogas and biomethane into our pan-European, national, region and even local energy systems. To achieve this, however, it is necessary to ensure a clear legal framework, conditions for the development of infrastructure and networks. In the face of rising energy prices, we cannot allow a situation where the most vulnerable are left with increased costs, nor can we strangle our economy as we equip ourselves with green energy. The hydrogen and gas package offers, among other things, a number of facilities for access to the grid for renewable and low emission gases and a certification system for these gases. As a versatile energy carrier, hydrogen can act as a buffer between energy demand and supply. The production of green hydrogen could revitalize local economies all across the EU, creating new focal points for industrial hubs with beneficial value chains. In Ireland, for example, the production of hydrogen could be derived using surplus wind energy, particularly offshore wind, which could be hugely important for the southwest of the country in particular. This is why I have called on the Irish government to formulate a coherent hydrogen strategy that would enable the country to take advantage of the provisions in the EU gas package. In this regard, I welcome the efforts to create a hydrogen market with a level playing field and transparent and free access to the network. I also welcome the certification scheme that will confirm whether the gas brought on the market is renewable or low carbon. However, I would also be interested in the Commission's views about enabling this certification scheme to credit the origins of LNG and if it comes from fracked or non-fracked sources. The debates on the gas package are just beginning, and I look forward to following the negotiations and having my own input. I would like to thank European Policy Centre for the opportunity to introduce this very, very important topic. Enjoy the discussions ahead. Goramina Marquez.
Certainly an interesting presentation by MEP Sean Kelly, and also a question we can perhaps come back to later during the Q&A session on expanding the certification system for low carbon gases to distinguish LNG that has been produced from fracking from LNG that has been produced from other sources. Now, I would like to give the word to Andreas Guth from Eurogas, who will give us an industry perspective on the recent gas package proposal. How does the European gas industry evaluate the proposals of the Commission?
Yep, thanks a lot, Simon, and thanks a lot for inviting us to share our views during this discussion. Maybe to start off with, maybe just a few words about Eurogas and how we place ourselves within the wider context of this package. So we obviously we do support the 2030 and 2050 climate neutrality objectives, and we really welcome the fact that the proposal really sets a clear signal that molecules, and I think Tania has mentioned this in her introduction, will be an essential part of this transition. And here, this does include natural gas, but more importantly, of course, increasingly renewable gases and low carbon gases. And this will really be essential in order to create a long-term, sustainable and affordable energy system. And here molecules will play an important role. And that very much is also recognized in the Commission's impact assessment. I think we see a relatively stable overall gaseous consumption level over to 2050. I think we're having a reduction of about 10–15% of overall gaseous energy demand in Europe. Of course, that isn't to say there's business as usual. Natural gas demand will decline to a lesser extent to 2030, but more significantly to 2050. That certainly is part of the picture. But gas won't be phased out. I think that's also clear from the package. There will be still natural gas in the system after 2050. Of course, climate neutrality also necessitates then the remaining emissions to be captured, for instance, through carbon capture and storage. So that really, well, how we position ourselves in the debate. And maybe to start with some of the positive aspects, in particular on the gas package itself. I think we have to recognize the tremendous job that the Commission actually has done in delivering this package. And I think the only thing we might regret is that it hasn't been delivered a couple of years earlier, because of course now the pressure is significantly higher. There's less time to 2030 to contribute to the objectives. But that, I mean, that doesn't say this is a huge milestone for the industry and really firmly places gas at the heart of the energy transition. So we, in principle, very much welcome the package. And with the risk of repeating what Tania had already mentioned, the fact that the Commission has proposed a single legislative framework for gaseous fuels is something that we very much welcome. I think it will help to avoid patchwork of legislation across different legislative files. So that is positive. Also, the fact that the Commission has set clear regulatory principles from the start is something that we very much asked for and welcome the proposal here. That clearly is necessary in order to provide investor certainty. Also, when it comes to consumer rights, very positive that the Commission has mirrored well, many of the provisions of the clean energy package. This is also something we support. And while not the main part of today's discussion, I think it also deserves mention because there's the methane regulation that the Commission has also released in December, and we really consider that a fundamental milestone and really part of the overall ambition of the gas sector. And it's really fundamental to codify the progress that has already been achieved on a voluntary basis by the industry and make sure that is applied across Europe. So by and large, very, very positive feedback to the extent. That doesn't go without saying that there are some, let's say, questions that we still have on the package. And here, I really do mean questions because we don't have a clearly defined position on all of these aspects. But one example here are the unbundling rules that the Commission has proposed. In principle, we do, of course, see unbundling rules as critical to the gas market, and they must be sufficiently robust to ensure equal and fair access to the market for all participants. But they must be objective oriented and to some extent pragmatic. And I mean, we can't design the unbundling rules simply to limit the burden of regulatory oversight. And eventually, we think the unbundling rules must be conducive to also ensure that gas distribution system operators are able to invest and are able to retrofit the existing gas system to hydrogen infrastructure. And I think that is critical here. Again, we don't yet have clearly been able to define the interpretation of the rules that the Commission has put forward. But certainly there are some concerns that many of the industry operators, infrastructure operators have raised. And we will certainly be looking at this in more detail. And I suspect this will be part of the discussion going forward. Another sensitive issue where we're still asking ourselves what position we will take is on cross-subsidization. In principle, we in Eurogas do not support cross-subsidization, but at the same time, well, we have to recognize that the hydrogen market will not necessarily develop autonomously, at least not from the very beginning. And I think here the Commission has tried to strike the right balance between to avoid significant distortions, but certainly this is something that we will be looking at very carefully to assess whether the balance has really been achieved. And finally, on the questions, and this is a point that Tatiana mentioned in the introduction as well, the position on the tariff discounts, something that in principle we do welcome, particularly when it comes to the reduction of tariffs at the injection point. I think this is possibly relatively easy to implement and already exists in certain member states. The The point that is a little bit more difficult for us is, again, not because they are the tariff discounts per se, but the question of implementation of the tariff discounts at the interconnection points. Here, it is unclear at this stage, at least, how this will work. Something similar had been tried for natural gas in the past, and it didn't materialize because of the sheer complexity of implementing such a system. And here we might ask ourselves the question whether the expected benefit from the elimination of tariffs at the cross-border points is something that that actually is justified, because I think in the Commission actually recognized in its impact assessment that the cost reduction would be relatively minimal compared to the cost of these gases. So it's something, again, we need to look at and assess how this could actually work in practice. And perhaps that brings me to the more problematic items that we see. What is really missing for us, and that might be a much more effective driver to decarbonize the gas system, and something that we have been calling for the past years together with numerous other stakeholders, is actually looking at binding targets for gas decarbonization set in Europe at European level. We have proposed 20% reduction of greenhouse gas intensity of gas consumed in Europe by 2030. We think this can be realistically achieved. It is somewhat of a technology neutral approach because all the different gases can contribute towards the objective. And in parallel, we've advocated for a binding renewable share to contribute to this. Here, we think that is justified because, well, so far at least, the ambition for biomethane is probably not exploited to its full potential. And so more can be done here. Again, we think this might be more conducive to gas decarbonization and tariff discounts, which make a marginal impact probably on the overall cost. And carbon prices alone will probably not deliver the necessary market signals. I think in the Commission impact assessment, they're talking about 350 euros per ton. I think it's unlikely that we'll see that level, or undesirable to see that level of carbon price by 2030. So additional drivers, I think, would be necessary. When it comes to low carbon gases, this was mentioned previously as well, something we of course welcome that it's included, but we do have a lot of questions about the certification, the thresholds of 70%, how this will be achieved, against what this will be measured. And so again, questions to be answered, and I recognize I'm running out of time, but maybe just the final point to end on something that might also then spark discussion later on, because I'm pretty sure that Esther will have a very different opinion here, is the role that we see for gas distribution system operators in the package. We think that it's fundamental that they're really integral part of the hydrogen economy. And but here we're probably much more aligned with the vision of the UK, because we think that hydrogen will play an important role to decarbonize those consumers, industry that's connected at this distribution level, but also the residential heating sector. And here, I think we would have liked to see a much stronger involvement by the distribution system operators. But I'll leave it with that and can certainly pick up some of those points in the discussion. Thank you, and sorry for being a little bit over time.
Thank you, Andreas, for your introductory remarks. Unfortunately, our speaker from the Commission, Tania Marquez, had to leave because of an emergency. But I would now like to turn to Chris Logue, Head of Markets at UK National Grid Gas Transmission. How do you evaluate the current proposals, and especially what are your thoughts on its potential implications for the EU's gas trade with third countries?
Okay, thanks, Sumit. Yeah, first of all, I'd just like to say we're delighted to be invited to this conference, and really pleased to be able to speak and give some views on this. Especially now we are, part of a third country and outside of the EU. In general, National Grid, we welcome the package. We thank the Commission for what we think is a really important development. I mean, it's hugely ambitious, and it's really the first major attempt, I think, anywhere to regulate hydrogen, or to put a framework in place for regulating hydrogen and low carbon gases. And it gives us something to build on in the UK. You know, I would like to think that our government is looking at this and doing something quite similar in many respects. I think we're pleased that in general the proposals build on the current market rules, and clearly they're going to evolve over time. Clearly things are going to need to be developed in different directions, but we have a successful gas market. Europe has a successful gas market. I keep saying we. I have to get out of that habit. It's going to be hard because I've been involved with Europe and a citizen of Europe for most of my life. So forgive me for slipping into that every now and then. So the European gas market has been successful. It's not without problems, but I believe it's a really good foundation for developing a low carbon gas market. I think other highlights that we're really pleased about. We're pleased that the Commission see blue hydrogen as a potential stepping stone, and I think, and National Grid's view is that it's essential that we're able to develop blue hydrogen because it's got a much greater potential to develop quickly and economically, and then over time it will be displaced by green hydrogen. But you know, it has a place in the market, and will have a place certainly for the next 30 or so years. I think it's interesting how cross-border trade is potentially treated there. I think it's interesting some of the comments actually that Sean Kelly made earlier, that, you know, his view, Russia's no longer a trusted partner for the EU, and I think that situation has been building for some time. I'm really hoping that there's not a knee-jerk reaction to what's happening with Russia that makes it more difficult for other partners, other third countries to trade with the EU. I think that would be damaging for the EU, and also unhelpful for third countries such as the UK. I strongly believe and trust that the UK will be a trusted partner. I know there are some teething problems with the UK leaving the EU. I think those will be ironed out over the coming months and years, and you know, we will continue to be a trusted partner for the EU, and that the trading arrangements put in place for low carbon gases are at least as successful as the ones that we've got for natural gas, because, as I said, you know, it's a very good, successful trade that we've got at the moment. Some of the things to pick out, we're really interested in the requirement to accept 5% hydrogen at all interconnection points. I think, you know, that's ambitious. Clearly, it's by 2025. It's clearly an ambitious target, but it's something that we really welcome. I think, you know, we see hydrogen blending very much as a transitionary state between 100% natural gas towards 100% hydrogen, but that transition might last for maybe 2 decades. And in order for it to be successful, it needs to happen quickly, it needs to happen efficiently, and it needs to be relatively simple. And I think certainly the Commission's policy shows a good ambition on that, shows a good ambition for the speed of rollout. I think, is it realistic? Is a question that's being asked, and I think it is. I think it is realistic for network operators such as ourselves to accept 5% hydrogen. We have some challenges in the UK around our gas quality law, so we have to amend that. That may take longer than 2025, but I hope not. But from a technical point of view, it can be achieved. I think what's not realistic, though, is the expectation that some people have put on that to say, okay, yeah, well, now it's allowable, we'll definitely have 5% blends everywhere, and clearly there's not going to be enough hydrogen around by 2025 to meet that goal. But who knows when we'll get to 5% across Europe, but it certainly should be achievable from a technical point of view. It's interesting as well how there's been a bit of talk already on this, so I'm not going to repeat it, but about the tariff discounts and having a zero tariff at entry points. I think we would be really cautious about that. If there's a zero tariffs introduced, then that cost has got to fall somewhere. And I echo a little bit what Andreas was saying around be careful not to have too much cross-subsidization, and also not to create barriers for trade. Because if all that cost is pushed to the external border of the EU, then that potentially creates a big barrier to enter the EU market, which is obviously quite important and quite interesting for us. I think, though, we do welcome, just a bit more positive note, that welcome that the consideration that's being given to third countries. I think the UK is in a unique position for the EU in that we clearly sit between continental EU and Ireland. So consideration of the legal status of third countries, I think that the package could be clearer on that, and how that arrangement is going to work. I hope and that will be developed over the coming months, and absolutely happy to be part of that development. I'm conscious of time a little bit. I've got some more points. Maybe they'll come out in the questions. But just to say again, we really welcome the package. We'll be responding to the bits that are of interest to us. Clearly, as a third country, not all of it's going to be relevant to us, and we'll stay out of that. But there are things that we can certainly improve upon, things that we certainly welcome. So, thanks, Simon.
Thank you, Chris, for giving us a third country perspective on these new proposals. Now, finally, our last speaker, Esther Bollendorff from Climate Action Network Europe, to give us a perspective from civil society. How do you assess the proposals to decarbonize the internal gas market, and what are your thoughts on its potential implications for the EU's broader climate objectives, consumer empowerment, and the internal market?
Thanks a lot, Simon. Thanks to the EPC for inviting us, Climate Action Network, here to this round. Really appreciate it. Just for a quick recap, so Climate Action Network Europe is the secretariat of more than 180 EU and abroad over EU borders climate and energy NGOs. We represent more than 47 million people. So we are a significant stakeholder when it comes to civil society. So yes, what is our take on this gas package? And I actually wanted to, so we had Tatiana's slides, which were looking into the need for the development of the energy mix in line with the Green Deal. I just wanted to have sort of a quick insight into an energy system scenario that we developed, Climate Action Network, together with the EEB, the European Environmental Bureau, on our vision of how the energy system needs to evolve if we are to respect the Paris Agreement and if we are to stay or to limit temperature increase to 1.5. So this actually brings us to, and I'll try to get this in. Can you see this slide? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So here is here are some extracts from our scenario. So yeah, first of all, we to stay within this temperature limiting temperature increase to 1.5, we say that we need to reach climate neutrality actually by 2050 already, and we need to get out of fossil fuels way before that. I mean, we need to get out of fossil gas by 2035. First of all, we need, as you see on this slide, we need to reduce our energy consumption. We need to halve it, at least almost halving it, and then we see that we get out of coal and out of oil and out of gas products by between 2035 and 2040. So more specifically on we do see here a role for hydrogen, obviously, and in the different key sectors. And I will come back to this priority sector use for hydrogen, which I think is key in the gas package. But yeah, we clearly need to get out of fossil gas between 35 and 40 the latest, and a big chunk of the gas use we see is also happening in the heating sector. So this is a bit of a sort of a context setting for where do we see, how does the gas package play into this now here? So it is, the intention is to replace fossil gas by renewable gases, by low carbon gases. So we do not necessarily share this view of leaving space for low carbon gases in a transition that we know that needs to happen actually very quickly. So leaving too much space to that and creating a lock-in effect for gas infrastructure, or then hydrogen infrastructure, which is sort of a blue hydrogen infrastructure and remains, has the potential actually to remain, to keep fossil gas much longer in the system, actually, as we can afford to have it in the system. So we see this quite critical, and we see the fact of having replacing a big chunk of our current fossil gas use by hydrogen. We see that as problematic. We definitely see a role for hydrogen, as I just showed here on this slide, but we see it in non-regret sectors and in those sectors where there's no other alternative available. We know that short distance transport, buildings, heating in buildings are sectors which can be electrified. We can electrify our heating, we can switch away from gas and go towards electrification. And this is clearly something that is relevant, I think, for this package, which is looking at how, yeah, hydrogen or renewable gases should be used. But I think the question about these, in which priority sectors it should go to mainly, is not sufficiently tackled, I think. And this is where the question on blending comes in as well. If we have an opportunity of a possibility to blend hydrogen to fossil gas, we know that it is not going to be usable for those priority sectors, such as energy intensives, such as steel production, such as chemical production, because those industry sectors need pure qualities of hydrogen. So if we are reasoning around blends, we know that hydrogen, that gas mix is going to go mainly into heating, into boilers, hybrid boilers, or boilers which can burn mixes, which can burn blends to heat homes, and that is definitely not a priority sector that we would want this package to sort of support. more than that. We've seen that a recent study which has been published by Fraunhofer Institute has shown actually that the blending, and I think it has been mentioned by one of the previous speakers here as well, that blending up to 5% is actually going to require quite massive amounts of hydrogen, actually approximately 1/3 of the 2030 target of the hydrogen strategy, these 40 gigawatt electrolyzers, which should be functioning by 2030 and producing hydrogen by 2030, would produce a certain amount, which by these blends could already be used up by up to 1/3. So that's a big volume, and it's a big volume which is shifted to one of a sector which can actually be decarbonized in a different way. So that's a very important point for us to be made. On the DSO side and the DSO involvement, or let's say that the integrated planning, so the proposal from the Commission to go towards more integrated planning and nationally integrated planning of gas, electricity, and hydrogen, I think are definitely interesting points. We've been working a lot on governance issues in the context of 10E and hydrogen and energy infrastructure planning. So the 10E regulation, which only has been finalized at the end of last year, and where we see similar, where we have focused a lot on the fact who is actually in charge of doing the modelization and the planning of the energy infrastructure. And we have a very similar question here: who is going to be in charge of the modelization and the planning of this new hydrogen infrastructure, which we think should be organized locally in clusters, organized and built closely there, close to the production spots. So if we talk about renewable hydrogen, well, close to, for instance, renewable hydrogen production spots, North Sea, for instance, and close to consumption clusters, consumption areas where you've got big industrial clusters of chemicals, chemicals or steel production, typically speaking, the northwest coast of Benelux, Germany, the Netherlands, for instance. That's an example. But we really see this happening in a clustered way. And so this national or this integrated planning is interesting, but we think that it should definitely also include a reflection about where is infrastructure needed. Do we need to repurpose the existing transmission and distribution level infrastructure to allow it to carry hydrogen? Do we need all of that infrastructure? Not necessarily. And I think the reflection around how, and the process around how this infrastructure maybe at some stage needs to be repurposed partly, but maybe also decommissioned, needs to be further developed. And there is a sort of, there's an initial sort of thought about that, but this certainly requires still more thought and more work. And finally, maybe a point on consumers and, well, the question of cross-subsidization, the question of cost for consumers. I mean, linking to this, to the governance question of who is doing that planning. And if we have, sorry, because I didn't finalize actually my previous thought. If we have fossil gas transition system operators being in charge to develop to think about modelization and planning of new hydrogen infrastructure, we do see a clear conflict of interest of having the incumbent industry planning for something that we actually don't really need. And this is obviously, this comes with a cost for consumers. As we will be in we could potentially be in an over capacity, sort of access capacity that is not required, and yeah, has a problematic impact from that point of view. So just quickly, on the unbundling question that has also been raised previously by Andreas, I think we are in favor of a clear ownership unbundling between, so horizontal ownership unbundling between fossil gas transmission or distribution system operators and entities which will be in charge of hydrogen infrastructure. So we don't think that there should be a link between those two. Clearly no ownership link between those two. A very final point on gas communities. This is something which has been sort of brought over from the electricity market regulation in terms of energy communities being able to produce a local community, citizens being able to produce their own renewable energy. This has been replicated and sort of copy pasted into the gas package, and it's something that we don't think has a place in here, because the sort of concept of a gas community is much less a reality today, and it's much more complicated actually to set up, as we have seen the case for this being in renewable energy production, in the sense of you have your PV panels installed on your rooftop. You can build communities around that in urban areas. So it's a bit of a different setting here, and we're not necessarily in favor of that. And I think I'm way over my time, and I'll stop it here. I also stop sharing my screen, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Esther. So before we open the floor, I would maybe ask our speakers to maybe give a reaction to each other, things you would still like to pick on. Yeah, basically anything that you haven't said in the presentations now would be your opportunity to do so. Maybe Chris, Logue first.
Yes, thanks, Simon. Yeah, I think thanks to Esther for interesting perspective, but I think I need to sort of rise to the challenge a little bit. That certainly I don't have the data for across Europe, but certainly looking at the UK, it's fanciful to think that we can decarbonize heat without gaseous fuel. I think it's short-sighted to dismiss the fact that we've got a very efficient, very effective energy transmission and distribution system that you don't seem to want to utilize when that could be converted to hydrogen quite in relative terms quite cheaply, and I don't know what your alternative proposal is. If it's to electrify heat completely, you would need to massively increase the production of electricity, which is difficult to see where that volume of production would come from. You would also need to hugely upgrade the transmission and distribution networks for electricity, which would require billions and billions of pounds, in the UK case, euros for Europe, to do so. Where there's a much cheaper, more efficient, more acceptable from a consumer point of view alternative. The gas transmission network in the UK on a peak day transports 6 times the energy of the electricity transmission network. To try and replace all that with electricity is, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but certainly on the timescales that you're hoping for is hugely ambitious, and probably is impossible. But it's also going to be massively expensive, and I think affordability has got to be a critical factor.
Thank you very much, Esther. I think you will want to give a reaction to that.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, no, I mean, affordability, definitely. I completely agree with you. We see what's happening with Russia. We see what's happening with the gas crisis or energy price crisis and gas crisis indirectly somewhere. So I think affordability, we are in the middle of the subject here. We have, Europe pays some 280 billion euros per year in fuel costs. I mean, that's just paying for the fuels that we burn, coal and gas, fossil fuels. So I think that's definitely a figure to keep in mind, because yes, I completely agree with you, Chris. We are the electricity, the renewable electricity deployment and renewable generation capacities certainly still need to increase. I mean, we've seen in many countries big increases already, and this across the world. They still need to continue to increase, and this will cost money. But we should also not forget what we already, how much money we're putting already today in those fuels, in those fossil fuels that we have to get out of, and how much money we can save if we are not paying for fuels anymore, because that's de facto, this is what is going to happen if we use wind and solar, which do not have those fuel costs associated. There's infrastructure costs, right? But those, we have them as well with the conventional energy sources. So I think this is, I think this sort of broader picture somehow should be kept in mind. And the whole sort of rationale of our discourse is that we need to shift then also significant amounts of money into those. I mean, stop putting money into low carbon development, into continued fossil fuel use and low carbon development, increasing or ramping up low carbon development, whereas we should put that money into the clean resources that we know and which are not in an immature stage anymore.
Thank you, Esther. Maybe Andreas, maybe you could pick on Esther's comments on ownership and bundling, which you also had which you also said something about.
Certainly I will, if I can just come back to the discussion at hand, maybe on the heating sector. I think we should also take into account that we're not just talking about electrification of heating, we're also talking about the electrification of transport. If we assume that on a single street, you want to replace every boiler with a heat pump, at the same time enable people to charge 1 or 2 electric vehicles. I think the peak load you're looking at in certain parts of Europe, if not most parts of Europe, would be quite difficult, I think, to actually supply with the existing infrastructure, electricity infrastructure. So I would fundamentally agree with Chris. I think it's a question of using the existing infrastructure to the best available extent in order to be cost efficient. Do I describe heating as a priority sector for those gases? I don't know if I would go that far, but probably we should make sure that we enable it so that we have a market that can decide where these gases can be most cost effectively used. And then on actually coming back to, before I come back to unbundling, also the question of well, generation of renewable electricity. I mean, we've looked at, we need to compare what is comparable, and the advantage of molecules is that it's dispatchable. And if you look at what it takes to make renewable energy dispatchable, a study that we have recently commissioned considers that you can cost effectively provide dispatchable energy with demand side response and batteries up to about 15%. For the rest, you need molecules in order to keep costs at a sustainable level. So again, I think it's not a question of, one option is better than the other. I think we clearly need both. And I think the package that we have at hand is probably a good basis to create that market incentives to provide the right signals. On unbundling, now finally coming to your question, Simon. If I understood correctly, actually, Esther, you are advocating to go even beyond what the Commission is proposing and to have ownership unbundling at horizontal level. Now here, I would question to what extent that actually supports your objective to prevent or at least disincentivize blending. Because as it stands, if you have ownership unbundling horizontally, you're actually encouraging distribution system operators to keep blending indefinitely, if you like, because they have zero incentives to actually invest into a dedicated hydrogen infrastructure, which at that point they have to divest. So I would question that approach, but it's perhaps something that needs to be assessed in a bit more detail.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Maybe now we can open the floor. I see Irina Skliar from Naftogaz, who would like to make a short comment on the role of Ukrainian storages. So yes, if you can put up your hands, you can make yes. Can she be given permission to speak?
Okay, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, perfect. Thank you. No, thank you very much, Simon, and all panelists for this discussion. Unfortunately, Tatiana left because I would like also her to hear a message. Well, our first message is, of course, we are very much welcoming this initial proposal of the European Commission. And I think every one of you more or less mentioned what's going on in Ukraine and the role of gas security of supply, at least in short term. For us is also, and for Europe as well, it's also a big issue. Price volatility is a big issue, and that's why we think it's the Commission is moving in the right direction. We see that in this proposal, they suggest to rely also on infrastructure, which is an energy community country, a third country next to European Union, which is Ukraine. Let me shortly remind that Ukraine has a huge storage, underground storage gas capacity of 31 billion cubic meters, of which 10 billion cubic meters can be offered for gas reserves for European suppliers. Given the current situation, at least as we see it, and Tatiana also mentioned that might be not enough incentive currently due to the high prices, the high volatility of prices for market operators or suppliers to fill in storages at current prices. So our idea would be also to, what we see at least it's reasonable at EU level, to consider imposing a minimum storage obligation on gas suppliers, which could be a function of the volumes committed on the users. It can be discussed. Also, target storage level can be discussed at the EU level, but we think that keeping a certain amount of gas storages in Europe could also help, not physical security of supply, but also tackle price volatility. And if EU moves in that direction, which we personally think is the right direction, we would also focus that whatever gas which is stored by EU end users in Ukrainian storages should qualify as meeting such an obligation request. Last remark, currently we have more than 1,000 clients from all over the world, not only European, but also United States, Arab countries, Asia countries who are storing gas in Ukrainian storages. So this is a factor for European also energy security. And I thank you with this.
Thank you very much, Irina. Would anybody of the speakers like to comment on this reaction? Maybe on minimum storage obligations and their role in ensuring security of supply. Maybe Andreas.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very interesting remark, especially given the current situation. I think here basically so far when we look at the proposal from the European Commission on the gas package when it comes to security of supply provisions, I think we can wholeheartedly welcome the initiative the Commission has put on the table there. We probably have a little bit more reservation on the joint procurement platform that is being proposed, but it's voluntary. For the rest, I think it's going into very much the right direction. When it comes to minimum storage obligation, it's not something that we have traditionally supported. And I think we would have to look at that point a little bit more in more detail. In principle, we do favor market-based mechanisms to make storage attractive. But given the current situation, on the other hand, I wouldn't say that we need to rule any options out. So I think the comment is very valid and should be looked into.
Thank you very much. Maybe another question from the audience now. A question from Carlijn Torenbeek. the gas package proposes a definition of 70%, and this definition leaves a lot of room for hydrogen based on fossil fuels or blue hydrogen to be called low carbon. Will this slow down the EU's decarbonization process? What are your thoughts on this? Maybe Esther.
Yes, thanks a lot for that question. Yes, indeed, I think those threshold discussions are quite lively and need certainly to be considered. We are not in a position yet to sort of take a strong position on this, let's say, to take a definite position on this. But we've been looking at those thresholds as they have been proposed in 10E, they've been proposed in under taxonomy regulation as well. And what is clear is that those thresholds they absolutely need to integrate full upstream emissions. So they need to look at the entire cycle of the low carbon fuel, so the production, from production to transport to end use. And if you say production, you also talk about methane leakages and methane emissions occurring during the extraction and the production process. Those are, we all know that those are not to be underestimated, that we regularly see new figures of how much they've been underestimated until now. And it is of crucial importance to consider full supply chain emissions when it comes to looking at the carbon content of a low carbon fuel. So in that sense, it really all depends. So I join, I think, here also what Andreas said, that we need to know against what this 70% are going to be calculated. There's a reference to the Renewables Directive. We know that that threshold comes from the initial discussion on biofuels, from that legislative landscape. But we need to have, I think there needs to be more clarity still about to what extent are full supply chain emissions included, to what extent do we know those emissions, which is all in immature stages yet when it comes to capturing the data, being able to measure leakages and being able to have a concrete idea of those leakages. So it is 70%, as long as we do not really know against what and to what extent full life cycle upstream emissions are taken into account, is quite meaningless.
Thank you. Thank you, Esther. Maybe another question from the audience for Chris. Given the EU's hydrogen strategy, which envisages importing around half of the EU's hydrogen demand, does the package need to address third countries more directly? And of course, you can also come back to the comments from Irina on storage obligations.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I'll answer the question first question first. So I think in terms of third countries, I think we welcome that that third countries are considered there. I think there is more detail required, and exactly how it's going to work for third countries needs to be fleshed out. But I think what we've got is a good starting point and something we can build on. And as I said earlier, we're very willing to work with the Commission and help to develop workable solutions for third countries. And I think particularly with the UK being in the unique position it is, it's really important that we are involved at some level. Just going back to the question on storage obligations, I think I understand why it's a topical subject at the moment, because we've seen historically low storage levels. I'm spent my career really supporting markets and building markets and putting artificial obligations in place. Kind of goes against the grain a bit for me. But having said all that, we are in fairly extraordinary times, and it could be that that some limited interventions are necessary, and having a storage obligation on gas suppliers or gas shippers. We've seen examples of where that's worked successfully and incentivize the development of more storage and incentivize the filling of the storage that exists. So I've got no mind on it, to be honest. I think the timing could well be right, even if it's a transitional measure. So I'm interested to hear views on that, but it's certainly topical, and I understand why.
Thank you very much. I see we have a hand up from the audience. Bart Kastermans, maybe he could be given permission to speak. Yes, Bart, I think you can speak now.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Ah, okay, sorry. It took me a second. I didn't find the unmute button that suddenly appeared on my screen. My apologies. Thank you for the very interesting discussion so far. I had a question in relation to the earlier debate on which sectors hydrogen should be used in. I heard certain voices arguing that it would make a lot of sense to use it in residential heating, and I wanted to explore that a bit further. In particular, if you would use hydrogen in domestic and residential heating applications, where would you source the hydrogen from? Would it be from electricity sourced? And then if it is sourced from electricity and you would be using green hydrogen, then of course, doesn't that render any arguments mute, as that you would require more electricity generation to be ramped up quickly? Because of course, you would even need much more electricity if you would use it to first convert it to hydrogen and then reconvert it to heat, because of all the efficiency losses as part of the process. So that argument seemed a bit odd to me, I must admit. The other potential would be a need to use it from natural gas, but then considering you're talking about a 70% efficiency, what would you do with the remaining 30% in a carbon neutral future? So if you would use this indeed to go beyond those limited sectors where there is no other solution, how would you deal with the other remaining emissions? Does the gas industry foresee the deployment of 100% capture of all process emissions at some point, including indeed upstream emissions and everything related to transport and downstream, or how would that function? Or if you do not have a perspective of developing that, how would you deal with the remaining emissions to be abated? I do understand why for the UK this seems to be an attractive option, because you have such a poor insulation of your housing stock, and that will require a very, very, very significant investment. But does it actually make sense to look at hydrogen as a quick fix-all? And to delay those fundamental changes, if indeed you will not be able to source the hydrogen at competitive pricing? Or do you have a solution for sourcing it then in the UK? So I would be very interested in the UK and the gas industry's perspective on this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bart Kastermans, for your comment. Chris, if you want to.
Sure. I mean, I don't have all the answers, but I think certainly in the short term, creating hydrogen from natural gases and capturing the carbon from that. I know it's not 100%, but it's way better than unabated use of natural gas. I think one of the real advantages with hydrogen is that it can be stored. So however that hydrogen is produced, if it's produced from electricity, it can be stored really easily, and that technology is well proven. And we've just been talking about gas storage, whereas to try and replicate that type of electricity storage and the energy volumes, and indeed you mentioned efficiency, that gas storing a gas is virtually indefinite. It can be stored indefinitely for any period of time, whereas storing electricity, we know that battery storage decays over time and decays quite rapidly. So that's far from efficient and far from easy, and has a massive use of natural resources. So I don't think there's a perfect answer here. I think it's going to be a development over time. It will start with production mainly from natural gas and capturing the carbon. Then electrolysis will come in and play a bigger and bigger role as the development of excuse me, the capacity for renewable electricity increases. But over what timescale, I'm not sure. But I think if you want to decarbonize the heating sector most rapidly, then you need hydrogen.
Thank you very much. So we're almost at the end of our policy dialogue. So I would just ask each speaker to maybe give his or her takeaway message in 1 minute, preferably. Maybe Esther can go first. And of course, feel free to react to anything you've heard, just heard.
Yes, thanks. I mean, it's obviously complicated. It's a complicated issue or topic, and we're looking at it from different perspectives. But I'm coming back at or hearing the last comment resonating still in my head, in my ears somehow. I think that it has been quite interestingly developed by Bart why hydrogen use in the heating sector is not the most efficient. If we talk about the green hydrogen, then that's it's conversion circles that we definitely do not need to repeat, and there's efficiency losses. And if we talk about low carbon, we do have we are not in let's say in a clean perspective and reducing significantly greenhouse gas emissions perspective. So for me, that's one important key element of the gas package that we need to look at and that we need to try to improve.
Thank you, Esther. Andreas, maybe you could give your concluding remarks.
I'll be very short. I think we need to make sure that we don't rule out any options, and it's clear for Europe, and it's a diverse system, and there is no one-size-fits-all solution to any of this. So this whole debate about hydrogen heating, yes or no, or is it all electric? I think it's a bit misguided. I think we will need all options, and they all have their role to play. When it comes to the package, I think it's a great start. We have a good basis for developing this industry. And I think if I had one wish is certainly that we increase the level of ambition when it comes to creating drivers and incentives for gas decarbonization. For me, or for us, that's the missing link. And if that is put in place, I think we can be properly put on track to 2030.
Thank you, Andreas. Chris?
Yeah, I probably Andreas has more or less summed up what I was going to say. Don't rule out any options at this stage. I think that the aims of the package are good ones. I think it does form the basis of a really ambitious program that can really transform the the or help to transform the energy outlook. And yeah, just going back, we know that as a gas industry, we've got a lot of change ahead of us. People have mentioned methane emissions on this call. We know that's a problem, particularly in certain sectors, and it is something that we're investing a lot of money to address. So that will improve. I'm sure other technologies will also improve as well, and not just in in the gas area. I think technology will see us out of the current problems we're in. I've got great faith in that, and I've also got great belief that the gas network and gaseous fuels will form part of the picture going forwards.
Thank you, Chris. So that brings us to an end. Brings an end to our discussion today on this very timely topic. I would like first to thank the UK mission for supporting this event, all the speakers, of course, for their valuable contributions and insights, and all the participants for joining us today and for the lively discussion during our Q&A session. If you would want to watch this event again, a recording will be made available on our website in the coming days. And I look forward to seeing hopefully many of you again at one of our future events at the European Policy Center. Please have a look at our website to see what we have in store for you in the coming weeks and months. And we will certainly follow up on current developments in Ukraine, but also, of course, on the various developments with regard to the Fit for 55 package. Hopefully see you soon, and thank you very much for joining today. Bye.
Very much.